hopefully that doesn't knock me completely off my Twitch stream, which is good. Okay, guys, so this is part of Cyber Wars 2020, because it seems like 2020 is going on for a million years. Tonight is the Flesh and Faces class, so we're going to cover skin tones first, and then we're going to go into the faces and spend some time on that, because most of the face is just getting the specific parts of where you want your paint at. Because I'm obviously recording this and seeing it so you guys can actually see everything is kind of important. I do have the actual 28mm figure. I also have a large giant, Bones Giant to work with. But that's going to be a little bit better, and then when we come to faces, I do have a specific face. Everything I'm going to do is the exact same thing I would do on a face or when I'm doing skin tones normally. It just depends on what the features are. So it's the same thing I'm doing if I'm working on a large bust figure, or if I'm working on a smaller 28mm figure. So again, don't be worried about what the technique is. Everything is the same. When we're discussing color and color recipes for skin tones, I appreciate the names on the bottle. You know, things like Reaper's triad system with like tan shadows and tan highlights are very helpful, especially when you're starting out. But once you start to feeling more comfortable doing more things, go ahead and start breaking away from those a bit. I'm just going to give you more options that you can paint with. Ginger Cookie is a frequent color I use a lot of the times for painting. It's part of Reaper's non-production line, so it's only made at certain times of the year, which we're going into now. I usually around the holidays time frame. And even looking at skin tones or colors that you wouldn't normally think about name-wise, like earthen browns, river leather, or walnut brown. These can make some great skin tones. You just have to look at them and think of them as the colors, not as the names on the bottle. Okay, so let's start off with our little guy. If he is too small and it's being too much of a problem to see what I'm doing, please let me know. I will jump into the bigger figures to do that at this point in time. Let's start with a size 0 brush, or size 1 brush, because it's just the size we're working with. For my base tone, I'm probably going to do a mixture of verm leather and tan shadow. No particular reason, just a combination I like. I tend to like a warmer tone undertone to my skin tones. More personal preference. You could mix in a little bit blue, you can mix in a little bit of purple. I start getting some shadow colors just building up already. I want to prefer just to paint in my shadow a bit. And just going to mix these guys together. About 50-50. Zoom will get me in place. And just going to start base coating. No problem. Thanks for the heads up. Okay, and my viewers see that or agree with that, please let me know. We will go bit majority vote, so I'm going to mix up a little bit larger allotment then. So I'm just going to try and lay down a nice even base tone. And frequently for my base color, I'm going to try and lay it down in 2 or 3 layers. What I will say is because we're painting a larger figure, I don't have time to cover everything. We're going to really focus on this portion of the figure tonight. It will show the different detailing that I'm talking about when we're trying to make our skin tones happen. I'll go a little crazy. We'll get some of the bicep as well up here. The arm gives a bit of a different shape we should discuss. So that one's drying. I'm actually going to do the same thing, so I want you guys, if you're painting along to the face of your figure, a little bit more. So the first figure, the larger one, is a Cloud Giant done by Reaper Miniatures. I think it's part of the Bones 1 line. I think it's that old. Might be Bones 2. This is a anonymous bus. This is ooh, I'm blanking on the name. It's one of the more famous painters for when he does classes on faces. He spent a lot of time doing this one because it's one of his figures. I do think it's a good figure just for teaching with, though. It has nice solid facial features on it. And yes, I know my paintbrushes strokes are showing. That's why we're going to be okay with room. That should be better on the focus. Yeah. Okay, buddy, you're moving over here. So I'm not expecting to cover everything in the first coat. I just want to get as much of it as I can. And then we'll come back and get a second coat onto that one when it dries that out. But by this moment in time, our larger figure should be dried up enough so that we can get some into it. It's a little more nail on it. And if the figure isn't dry, just give it a few more moments. The last thing you want to do is put wet paint over somewhat dry paint and tear the paint. And once you start getting those tears, they're very hard to work your way out of them. And there's a good old-fashioned air power blowing on the figure. So mixing back up and just going with the dry areas to add that coat. Now, base coating shouldn't be a brain off period. It should be a period where you're looking at the model and trying to figure out different things. You know, where's the jawline at? Where does the cheekbones want to structure at? Did the sculptor know what he was doing when he sculpted muscles? You know, the person has extra muscles on top of muscles. You know, this guy obviously has no armor pieces, so it's easy to see everything. But if they had hair, is that little bit of a ridge the actual ear sticking out? Or is it part of the hair? And as long as you're doing applying thin coats, you can always add more paint or more coats to it as it dries on out, and so you feel yourself get the best layer that you can. guys dry out a little bit more. I do like the bones figures for pricing, but sometimes for drying they take a little bit longer. Also, my apartment isn't as unbelievably hot as it was last night. All my neighbors must have decided where they actually want their temperatures at. Alright, so while we're doing that, I'm letting that dry out. So what I'm going to do is add some tan shadow. I'm going to add some tan highlight. Now there's actually tan in the middle. I just prefer to skip on out. It makes the process a little bit quicker. If I was trying to do this for a competition, I might use that middle piece, or I might mix my own, depending on what color results I want. So with the bonus triads, don't feel you have to do all three all the way on up. If I'm doing something for gaming, I might want to make more divisions and more splits between it to just speed up the process. I'm also going to add a very small amount of dark sea blue from Vallejo. So a nice combination color. What we're going to do is we're going to grab a little bit of the dark sea blue, and we're going to mix it into our basing color. Now what we're going to do is underneath all these lines and ridges, we're going to try to get a little more shadow into them, so we're going to kind of paint this out as our first shadow. It doesn't have to be a heavy shadow. It does have to start catching a little bit more detail from everything. However, it also has a bigger ridge to it. Cover more shadow, you can always come back and cover some of it up. As you keep going, it gets harder and harder to come back and get your shadows in. The more time you spend on your highlights and bringing colors on up, the more risky it is to come back in and bring them back down again. Makes it very easy to go too far. You're going to see me do this often while I'm doing it. I'm damping out my brush. I'm just rinsing on a little bit of water, the tinging sound that you're hearing. Taking it so I have a damp brush, and then just touching the edge of the paint and pulling it down to help blend out a little bit. So this bicep in here, things good to remember is that because the angle where the model's actually at is upright position, we're going to want a little bit more shadow into it. So we can mix it in a little bit more. And just get some deeper shadow into it. That dries. You can come back with some more pure color of the dark sea blue. And any really dark blue, purple will work for this as long as you're subtle with it. And just do some slight touching. Because it's going to help to deepen out the shadows that you have on the figure in general because of the coolness of it. And just kind of bring it up and pull that back into the cracks and crevices. And so with that dark sea blue, it's coming back in and getting some of these deeper spots. The armpit area. Yeah, I'm not worried about being incredibly clean right now. I want to build up some color transitions and get everything into place. Now, let's let him dry it out. Let's talk about the facing. We're going to move back and forth. If that's too much and you don't want me to stick with just the skin, and we'll come back to faces, we can do that as well. But I do want you guys to start to think about the shadows and where your light falls at. So while that's drying, let's talk about the face for a second. So generally, can't do that from the screen. Can't do it from the screen. So in general, when we're looking at a face of a model, we're actually looking at the model to actually have these warm tone and cool tone zones. This is really good if you're doing a bust, this bottom one. If you're really not working on a bust or a larger figure or a very competition heavy figure, that's a bit excessive. But this is a good idea of where to put some warms and cools at. So generally the top of the forehead is going to have a warmer tone to it of yellow, where the things like around the eyes, the cheeks are going to have more of a redder tone to it. That's where the smaller blood vessels are at. So things like capillaries, the things that make us blush, or the reason why our nose gets red when we drink, just help to show off in that portion of it. And then on the other side, because that's starting to face away from the light, is that blue zone or the teal zone. That's good to about that 5 o'clock shadow area you can think of most guys. Try not to put 5 o'clock shadow in your female figures. It does not look the best in the world. Things you want to try and be on top of is just those modifications. A little would go a long way, and you don't have to put a ton of it into it. And depending on the shape of the figure, it also makes a difference. So if for some reason this figure was sideways, and I didn't do a zenithal prime, and this side over here was the side pushing up towards sunlight, that yellow zone would be more on this cheek over here, with the red zone being more around the nose and the face center part in here. So positioning of the model makes sense and is important as well. So if you're doing a victim lying down, it's going to change the skin tone slightly. So make sure you always keep your reference to your skyline. So since this is a male model, I'm going to be okay with doing a little bit more extreme. If I'm doing a female figure, what I want to try and do is just keep this blending a little bit more subtle, and the coloration a little bit more subtle. So things I'm going to darken on up is underneath the eyelids in here. There's going to be more shadow at. Again, I'm using blue. I can come back in and put the red tones in a little bit later. The maxillanasal folds, we're into the nose here. He's got a scrunching kind of eyebrow look to it, so we can put these guys into here. The other side of the eyebrow. The other line of the eyebrow here, and the eye ridge. Underneath the lip. And I want to make sure that I get a decent amount on the underside of the chin. And so if I go too far, I can just take my brush, damp brush, and just keep working the way up till it fades away. So I'm just working my way up. It starts to fade away. Things also keep in mind, depending on how the cheekbones are built. So I may want to push a little color back into the cheekbone. I shouldn't say the cheekbone. Under the cheekbone, into the cheek itself. Now if you do this, you're going to make the cheekbones more prominent, just something to be aware of. And this is a great way to kind of get either a feel for a villain or such. Typically we like to animate our villains with more angular features. We tend to like our good guys with more round features. In case anyone in here is into animation. So that wet paint, I'm just kind of self-blending it through. Okay. So let's come back to our giant here. So now we have those colors on and we can come back in and we have everything shaded the way we want. We use some tan shadow. And now we're going to start getting the upper ridges of everything. I'm always going to like base coat this all over again, but we're going to save that shadow color and a very small minutia of that base tone that we put down onto it. I'm trying to pull all those colors close to each other. top of the peck up here. Rise up into here. Form into here, and then like the form obviously on the top section up in here. It may even have some air connection between the two, and just talking back and forth to each other. So it starts building on color. In here, I wanted to wipe out all that shadow color, but I'm going to come in a little deeper and just try and get this ridge a little bit more highlighted. You guys have any questions so far? If you have any questions, please feel free to pop on in and ask. Since it's going to be on the stream later on in the future, and if someone misses out a question here, you might have it on the stream on YouTube later. Just easier to get it out now. Okay. So going back to the face. Places we're looking to highlight even further. Let me get this out of my way. Get it from here. Some of those seam kind of spaces, we're looking for everything that's a little more rigid or more raised. So we're going to get the chin, come out along the jawline. We're going to see that just underneath the bottom lip though, when we blend everything on out, because that lip does cover up a lot of the shadow area. Just blend everything on out. And when we blend on out, we're going to come back along this jawbone. We're going to get the tops of the cheeks, on the jaw, on the cheekbones. If they're not quite ready yet, go ahead and spend some time on blending. We'll get some highlight on the top of the forehead, or into the forehead, since the guy is losing his hair and thinly cut as far as that mohawk goes. So we're into those areas into there. Now all this is a matter of how much time do you want to spend. The more time you spend layering up and blending, the finer the model is going to look. The less time you spend, the little roughness to it, which is okay on gaming pieces. So don't be afraid to find a space that's in between, you know, where your comfortable things are looking, but not spending so much time that it's dragging you along and you're, you know, losing the will to paint your army. Okay, you grab the mixture of tan highlight and tan shadow. I'm just gonna make my midtone. The reason I like to do this is I can actually mix and match what I need to do. I can add more tan shadow if I need to go a little bit darker, or I can add more tan highlight if I need to push my highlights a little faster. And again, just gonna put them over the areas where I think I definitely need highlight at. Then I want to work my way into the more precarious places towards the end. Just getting those highlight spots again. So, tops of the muscles, but just a little bit less than we did before. Be cognizant where the shadow falls at those other locations, though, but wherever one of those locations go. And just keep blending away. Walter, just giving a quick sound check to make sure I'm being heard properly. I'm not seeing any messages, so I just want to confirm. Though my mic was off, I'm pretty sure that you'd make fun of me by now. Thank you. Right, with faces. So as we move up, we're just going to go and tighten up the areas. So we're getting more to that tip of the chin. Still leaving that shadow behind. Top of the cheek in here. Again, just blending things out as you need to. And how far or how little you need is a matter of experience and practice. The more upwards facing a body part is, such as these under the eyelid portion here that I'm painting right now, it's definitely facing upwards, so it's going to need more light than some of the other areas. And coming in again with cheek over here. And last time up in that forehead. Just trying to get the forehead portion right. Clean the brush. Make sure you don't have that little water droplet that sits there. That's a good way to kind of destroy your paint. And paint blob zoom. You're just pushing that around a little bit. So I hope you guys are seeing how that face is starting to come along now at this point in time. Let's lay him over here to break for a second. And take a sip of the drink. Okay, okay. So continue on. Oop, Twitch just did something to me. Okay. So I'm gonna grab the tan shadow highlight. And we're going to tighten up the effect rate again. Now be careful on muscles such as these guys in here. So it feels like the muscle should be always highlighted on the top. But depending on how deep that muscle is and what's near it, it may not get this little top edge. It may actually get more of a middle highlight or middle tone highlight. It just depends if it's the top pec, top ab. Sometimes they have too many. continue to highlight my way up. Now, if you're interested in doing weathering effects into a model, such as bleeding or scars or a bunch of stuff, even if you're thinking about like tattoos, which we're not covering in this class per se, but what we can do is this is where I'm starting to think about where they might go. What has a large enough open area that I feel comfortable working with? What kind of things can I say in that piece of graffiti that is okay or comfortable? And push that highlight a little bit more up over here. Do 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 do. So, if you're starting to see your paint start getting a little chalky, because as we add more color to this and thin it down the paint, and also have essentially white being added in the form of a lighter color, you might start losing a little bit. So we can always bring it back. I'm going to use our original base tone, which was we're in leather. Mixed with tan shadow. And we are going to make a wash out of that, as long as I don't break anything on my desk. So adding some of that to the palette space. And for my washes, I do like to use a little bit of a wet palette. And the highlight tone. I can just come in here and make something on up. That looks a bit too bright, so I want to grab more darkness. And that feels a bit better. So all I'm looking for is it for it to smoothly, and when I flick it down, it's running down fairly quickly. And a good wash when I'm painting it on, our glaze should actually kind of stay on top of everything versus falling into the cracks and crevices. I'm going to thin it down just a bit more. There you go. And now I have this nice wet kind of territory. So I start to glaze on top of everything. And just keep working those colors. So we're going to see as that glaze starts to take out some of the brighter colors out of it and just kind of push everything back down to like the lower value. So it's going to darken the miniature up, but it's going to make those values compressed closer together. That's going to give you the appearance of a better blend. Okay. We're probably in the same territory in the face as well, so let's go ahead and grab our color mix here. And we're going to kind of blend on it. Well, you see, just bring this guy over. For video, let me guys if I get out of the camera. Just glazing the whole thing. So, glazes are super thin, they're a little bit on the wetter side, so we will have to let them dry. And give them moments for them to dry. Okay, so while we have that drying, let me point out this is part of the Cyber Wars convention. Cyber Wars can be found at this Facebook page. And on the main page, looking at the different events can be found over here. Oop. Just give you some additional links that we can actually use to find the different stuff for the convention. There's also a Discord, but I'm pretty sure everyone's gonna jump on the Discord when they can. Okay. Well, if you want to repin the pop those in occasionally, just so we can get a chance to see them and we can advertise away, feel free, please, sir. A little more drying time. No problem. The links I just popped on in, if you want to pop them up occasionally, I would be greatly appreciated. Thank you, sir. I owe you an extra moderator donut one day. And Nightbot will occasionally do the Facebook group. So maybe just the HMGS page, please. So as you see, the skin tones are building up fairly nicely. And it's the exact same process I'm doing when I'm doing any of my competition figures, or if I'm doing a bust, or even I'm doing one of my play figures. In a competition figure, I'm just spending more time re-glazing back down and to help blend out those colors. And if you're doing something that's got a different skin tone than human skin tones, all it is just choosing out the appropriate color mix and going lighter into it. When I'm doing an inhuman skin tone, ultimately I'm trying to get my highest highlight to be a flesh color that's recognizable as human along the forehead, nose, and lips. And it just helps to make everything kind of gel a little bit better and makes us register that this thing is a living thing a bit easier. It's just what we're used to seeing in real life. So I have that mixture of here, so we're going to add maiden flesh now. This is another Reaper color. However, I do believe this is part of the non-production line now at this point in time. Any good ivory that's on the warmer tone side is a good combination for this. So a linen white, and linen white's probably too strong. They're a khaki highlight. That's not khaki highlight. Would have a little bit off. You just have to probably add just a little bit of red to it to make it blend on out. But don't be afraid to experiment a little bit. And that's just because it has a little bit of warmth to the skin tone. So I want to continue warming it on up. So I'm taking my tan highlight and mixing it with my maiden flesh. And finding those small little bits, I'm just kind of a little thinner. So all I want to do is take a little damp brush and push around that color a bit. And I can come back in here and steal a little bit to blend everything up, since I just used too much there before. And with a damp brush, I can come back in, scrub a little bit, steal a little bit, and put some down until it's no longer a good well for me anymore. And if you push out and start losing your shadow color, don't be afraid to go ahead and grab and push it back on in. Yeah, the non-production list just kind of popped with Reaper. if I have time, I'll try and find the forum one like that. So maggot white is a color I use quite frequently. Unfortunately, it is on the non-production list, which means they only make it for limited times of the year or such, or for special things. Um, you can buy it, but they'll charge you $5 a bottle over the normal price, and a minimum order is 10. So I'm trying to get the focus a little bit sharper for you guys. Oh, right down a bit. But I'm glad he got made in flesh during the shipping fest. And everyone say hello to our convention director as well. The man of the hour for Cyber Wars. So I'm just going to highlight that. If I get a point where I see more extremeness at, I can always come back on in and pop a little extra shadow into those areas. And having that shadow right next to the highlight will help to push a little bit more extreme. Only 15 to go. Shipping containers or conventions? Is this official? You're signing on for 15 more Cyber Wars? I think I just scared. Shipping containers. So again, I want one more shadow into here, so I'm just adding that shadow color and with a damp brush, teasing it out until it blends fully away. And that'll help to make that muscle bulk just feel a little bit better. Now I'm doing a small section right now, and I'm doing a full figure. I'm of course working all the sections. What I like to do, in my personal way, I know some people will do it like a section. So what they'll do is they'll define this as what they're working on right now, because the strapping will make a difference. Because when I come over to here, doing skin tones, this is obviously getting more light, and this back is getting more light. So I would use a different ratio. I would use the same colors, but I would use more shadow in here, because it's deeper in my shadow zone. Because you can see the black primer right there, versus up in here, which has more light to it, which will make that pop a little bit more. So be aware that there's an overall gradient that I want from the figure as well. And that plays more of a role in like these big old barbarian kind of figures. Because I want the lightest highlight to be definitely around the nose and the facial features and any chest that's showing on up. And then overall the gradient should be getting darker and darker and darker as we go along. So the toes and the feet are pretty much more shadowed than they are, highlighted. And just play with your range from there. That's more of a factor of if you're trying to paint really for people to look up close. And again, I wouldn't do that for every miniature on the planet or every one of my armies or my lists, but definitely doing something as simple as my leaders that way can make them look sharper and a little bit better. Now I'm using that dark sea blue from Vallejo to shadow one out, but I can use any darker purple or blue color to do that with. It sounds funny, but it really is that shadowed nature to it and that cool color that also, make things feel shadowed. Even in traditional art, like I showed you on the facial expressions thing before, they relabel it as a blue or teal area. Keep trying to grab it from the wrong screen. Oop, going on with that. Come on. There we go. I moved the wrong thing twice. So it's that teal, gray, 5 o'clock shadow area that's downplayed, and by just cooling those colors off, we can get better skin tones resulting from it. So you have all those shipping containers. Why am I teaching the weathering class? That should be good this time. Again, if you get a little too strong with it, or a bit too much, with that damp paint, damp brush, and just tease the edges of it, I'll make a better blend for you. Let's be aware of small little divots or changes in the muscles. So in here, I have this little bit of push into it. And I can either emphasize it by just grabbing a little bit of color. And you know, that little tip that would show down here to pop a bit more. And you can push it a little bit further. And then up in here, we're just going to shadow again. So this is one of those weird shadows that's not on the underside because this big old armor plate's in the way. So that's going to actually bring it down a little bit more and just push that a little further. So, there was a little bit. We're going back to our face and let that dry out a little bit. And you can see once you kind of get into smaller details, things don't need as much drying time. So, going back to the tan highlight, I can get the bridge of the nose because we're going to get the more detailed now. I'm going to grab into the nasal portion, nasal arches. And we want to get underneath this eyelid a bit more. Now I know Walter and Watchmeister are probably doing most of the chatting in chat, but if anyone does anything besides 28mm figures, please let me know. I'll discuss it. If you want me to stick just to 28mm and what we're going to be comfortable doing with 28s, I'll stick into that territory. And I'm also getting a big portion of the forehead. I'm generally just trying to blend that on out. A lot of times, especially in 28mm figures, especially historicals, are going to have hats or helmets on. I don't need a ton of highlight space into here. What I will do is need some shadow into that area. So let's say this guy had a hat or a helmet, such as my Ashigaru, or even my like Commissar for my sci-fi model over here. So generally where we see the hairline at, we're going to want to try and get a really dark color, even if it's a lighter blonder kind of color here. And try and just line out the outside the edge of the hairline. You know, dark lining is a thing, but we want to make sure that even in the subtle part in here, because we're going to have a portion that hair becomes skin and skin becomes hair, and having that transition line when we start to darken everything on up and try and highlight it or paint appropriately, that'll make a change even to our base tone that will help us show that separation line. Yes. So, actually, let's try and do it. Do I have a bearded miniature anywhere near here? I don't happen to, but let's make him have a red beard. So, are you talking about a person who's got a red bearded individual who has a 5 o'clock shadow? Or is it a person with already have a red beard and I'm using the purple, blues, and the skin tones for it? So, does the person already have a beard? And we're trying to get the skin tones appropriate. Right ahead with 5 o'clock shadow. So I still want that. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to mix some warmer tones into it. I'll probably stay more purple in that color, but I'd find a purple with a red hue to it. Um, Something such as burgundy wine would be a good color for that one. Typically when I'm actually doing a true 5 o'clock shadow, and I'll actually show a true 5 o'clock shadow, and not. The tough part is, yeah, just tinge it a little more to the red side. The tough part comes when it's a true blonde. Because blonde stubble doesn't show very well. So I want to make a nice thin kind of glaze out of it. And I'm actually doing like a 5 o'clock shadow effect. I'm just going to glaze on my color. And I may take 1 or 2 attempts to kind of glaze in the 5 o'clock shadow. This is one of those effects, the more patient you are with it, the better you're going to get the effect to go. I'm going to pick up a little extra underneath the neckline, so we don't end up with a neck beard. Or probably like a COVID beard right now for everybody. Hopefully blowing the figure's not too loud on the microphone. So hopefully you can see that 5 o'clock shadow starting to develop. I could just push that a little further, just putting more layers onto it. And I wanted like a red-headed one. Where that purple and red hue it. Just a hair. And this is a matter of a little bit goes a long way. Because we still want the cool color showing up, that the stubble there. And what I can even do, if I start pushing one way too much, I can glaze alternatively. So I can do my warmer color. And just clean up your glaze a little bit. So you can start seeing that beard line and that stubble starting to show up and build on up a little bit. Oh, it's a little wet right now still. Again, if you see it on the drier side over here. And the same would be true if I painted the hair a bit. So if I had the hair up here and I had a painted effect into it, I would want to stubble out the sides a little bit. Especially if it's like a person in the field or serving. Because doubtfully they had time to, perfectly shave it every day. So I still want the line, that defining line where hair becomes skin and skin becomes hair. But that gives you that 5 o'clock shadow territory. That lets me start blurring the line a little bit. but I still want that little bit of defining line of where hair lines out at. Otherwise, you end up with a Bart Simpson or Lisa Simpson effect, where you actually don't know where head becomes hair or skin at. It's just an assumed line. Which looks good from distance, but as soon as someone picks up your figure, it gets a little thrown off. And you can see that now it's dried out a little bit. The colors are showing a bit better for that 5 o'clock shadow on that side. Things like making a facial expression, if he's sneering or has an open lip or a more pronounced lips where it depends on the figure. So 15mm models may not have lips strong enough sculpted to actually do this with. 28mm models almost always do. When we're highlighting, you don't want to highlight the top lip and the bottom lip evenly. You actually want to just give a little extra highlight to the bottom lip. And that's because that bottom lip is the one that's facing the sunshine. So it's going to get more of a highlight territory. Sorry, a little scratch on the walls. It's driving me crazy. Teeth. If a model's having teeth that shows, it's too hard to do them as individuals unless you have a very detailed bust or a larger figure. It's usually just easier to have a reference to the teeth. Having them as a white is often problematic because it's too white. So something like a maiden flesh. Most historical models will be actually better for it. It doesn't overwhelm us with the whiteness on it. And if that's not quite in territory for you, something like a khaki white that doesn't have that same intensity will be good for it. On this figure, since it is a bit larger, I can come in and get the teeth separation line. So I'm kind of giving the impression of a bottom set and a top set. And that's usually better at this scale. If I do something such as coming in, and this is where I need to put my visor on. So at this scale, I do something as trying to line each tooth. I can very easily get more of a skeleton feel, kind of like a kid drawing a skeleton. Because if a line gets too deep or too dark, you wind up knocking out the tooth. So the bottom ones are having a little trouble showing on up. And this is kind of interesting because I've actually seen a few people actually purposely block out teeth or re-angle teeth on models to make them look more vampirish. So they had a kind of a badass model, and I think this one's one of the ones I've seen actually people do it with. They've darken out some angles. I try and get more fang corners to it, and then re-highlight those fang kind of corners. trying to push teeth more vampirish or more mean. You actually had some tribes that actually pointed their teeth or shaved down their teeth. Not that you're not that society that you're living long in, but you know, it does make you really scary to the enemy. Eyes and faces are always interesting. So, exact same way I would paint eyes. That's how I would paint eyes on this figure. I'm just going to use a larger one so it's easier for you to see. So an off-white of some type is better than a true white. Usually warmer is better on a small figure. Unless you have a large enough figure, I don't bother with a colored iris. A dark color is quite fine. So, I'll bring the bigger brush out so it feels like a fair fight. I'm describing it. So you have this brush that's all loaded in, and you want to put an eye. The first thing I like to do is actually point the brush so you have a better tip to it. So you can do that by running it on the palette if you're using a wet palette and helping to form a better tip. If you're not using a wet palette, if you're not using a paper towel that's damp, like because you've been wiping your brush clean on it, touching it to help form a better tip or point to the brush is important. So I'm going to start with the walnut brown first because it's super dark and almost blackish. Yeah, try not to lick your brushes. Unfortunately, my mentor taught me, and unfortunately, I have a very slight brush licking habit. So that eye is the easy eye for most people because it's on my side of the face when I'm right-handed. What happens is this eye becomes harder because I have the nose in the way. The best thing to do is actually turn the model around, get the nose out of your way. Come out that corner and pull to the other corner. Now you have trouble getting to that corner, you can always come back over, straighten the face out. You know, the corner, I just missed a little spot here. There you go. Let's widen the eye out a little bit. I have a little bit of debris in this eye, so it's trying to kick me out of the grooving for it. So there's our eyes. Now, wait till those are good and dry. Come back in, and all I want to do is just try and get most of that eye filled in the exact same way. All I want is just a little ring. Oh, the dark color is showing. A little ring is just going to represent that line, but again, separating the eye from the rest of the surfaces. Now, things you can do, and I'll try and get this, but you make small ovals on a Word program or images and try and shrink the picture down smaller and smaller until you get better control with it. Some of it is just a brush control time thing. So the more time you spend on your brush control, the better you get with it. So don't be afraid to keep playing and keep modifying until you get to what you need to do. Now, if we look at eyes themselves, bring up a picture of an eye from one of my friends. That's here. Add source. Media file. Portrait and Tiffling. Let's borrow Jess. So this is my friend Jess, who very delightfully volunteered to model for me at one point in time. So this is a dead-on stare at the camera effect. No problem. dead-on stare straight-ahead camera effect. You'll notice that the eye is not touching all the way around, and a lot of times we try to paint our eyes, we're actually making contact in both portions of it, on the top and the bottom. That's really not a thing that we do. Get it out. Media file. Even if I have GS change your head position, there's still that little area where we're not making contact with. So don't feel the eye has to touch everything perfect in both directions. So when you bring your eye in, we just want a rougher round shape. And I want to focus the contact more on one section than the other. And even more so, I'm going to tell you that it's very difficult to get both eyes centered on something. So I want to tell you my preferred method of cheating this. If you watch people, it's very rare that people are looking dead on straight ahead, especially for prolonged periods in time. What's much more natural is for us to look where action's at or scene or activity is happening at. Models frequently have their heads sculpted in a turned or twisted position, even for historical models. If I borrow some of my Ashigaru here for my test of honor list, so you can see that the heads are rotated around a little bit because they're in firing positions. So even making these guys a little bit crooked. To be fair, if you have a really good brush, you're going to get some really good itty-bitty points onto it. This is a spot where good brush control comes in at. If you don't, using like a tip of a pen or even a micro pen, or yep. But yeah, these portions in here gives a good angle for it. So pretend something's just off the angle a little bit. It makes it much easier to get an eye. So something interesting is happening somewhere in the model. It gives a little bit more life to it, and gives them a little more visual interest that this model is in the world somewhere. So I can have them looking off over here. And even if I have to turn the model upside down to make it happen, absolutely. So it's just far easier to get it right the first time by having the model looking off to the side somewhere. And I can play with that. Let's see if I can get the tilt just right. So getting that model to look off to the side a little bit gives a little bit more visual interest. And if you have to, it's much easier to correct the eye by getting a little dot in the one corner that's gilding too far. And shave it back down a little bit than trying to make the whole new face or trying to get another eye into it. And a lot of times I even recommend doing the eye that's going to give you more trouble. So I'm right-handed, so I almost always find the right eye, well, the model's left eye, my right-handed side, the easier eye to do. So I'll often do this one first, get it so I'm happy with it, and it's far easier for me to make this eye match than to try and make or correct this one. In this case, I just need to make this eye a little bit bolder. I'll get some better results from it. So there's just some different things to push around and play with a little bit to try and get that in and out focus of the eye. Far easier to do, especially on a smaller scale. On a larger scale, we can talk about, If I want to do a good eye on a much larger scale, such as a bust, I'm actually looking at putting 2 different colors into the eye, because the bottom of the eye, because it's an orb, I'm trying to do more like a gem. Bring you guys in a little bit. So on that portion of it, I need the eye. Oh, not focusing there. Come on, I know you want to focus for me. There you go. To have a little more darkness and the top to have a little more light. Sorry, reverse that. Top a little dark, bottom a little light. It's a gem. And get some better effects that way, because I have more room I have to work with, so now I have to do more work to get a better eye. So if we're doing just 28 millimeters, don't fight the distance too far. Just, use what's to your advantage to kind of work from there in that territory. Okay. Let's talk about cuts and scrapes and kind of fun stuff like that. So on a model for cuts and scrapes, kind of a good weathering effect. Also is really good for models that are in combat. I like to use a darker red. I'm even going to mix a little bit of walnut brown into this red because I want it super dark. And I'm just going to put a line somewhere on the model. Yeah, it's a little closer still. Alright, I backed it all the way out. I'm going to take a highlight color, because now what's happened is that cuts essentially made the skin open up, so it's a dent. So where I have the cut at, it's essentially into the skin now, as if it's been cut or slashed. So this under area we should treat as a zone where we're going to put some highlight to it. And the way I like to think about it and describe it is, this is the area where the skin's falling forward a little bit, and it's going to catch just a little bit more light. So I'm as thin of a line as I can. I take my visor up so I can't see that as great as I would like to, but eyes are getting old. I'm just going to put my dark line back in a little bit. So that's going to start showing signs like that's a cut or a slash. And we can even add to that effect a little bit. So I can grab a brighter red, which is a more bloody color, and just come in and touch the model and pull down a little bit. And we kind of have a nice little bleeding wound, essentially. I love doing this with my gladiator models for Arena Rex. It gives them a little slash and feel to everything, and just a little bit of depth to it. If I take a lighter color, I put it on the model, and I come underneath of it with a darker color. Turn it out a little bit, bring that back in. Darken it up just a bit more. Like a shadow color is kind of what I want it to be. I let it dry properly. Give me a moment, guys. I apologize. I'm getting impatient to teach exciting things. Do a nice dark line underneath of it. Come on, gamer, focus in on me. Come on. I know you want to do it. It actually look more like a scar, because that scar is going to be raised on up. If you actually truly want to make it a raised scar and you're not using a wet palette, so you're going to start getting this thicker paint at one point in time, the paint's going to start to scab on over, like a better way of describing it, and develop a skin on top of it. You can actually take that skin and put it on top of the model, and pretty much sculpt with that little bit of texturing. Let that dry fully, and then paint it, and it can actually make some pretty good scars that way. On a wet palette, it won't develop that skin quite the same way unless you're doing quite a few hours. Yeah, that's not ready. That's been on the palette for a while. Just because the wet palette keeps the paint moister than anything else. Now the thing to be arranged is, so you need to make sure that the cuts and scratches are places that are reasonable to get to. If it's in a spot that's way under armor, it makes it look odd. Also, if the model's doing something like raising its arm, or changing or leaning forward, that cut and that blood still needs to be very much downwards against gravity. It might make more sense for that palm of the hand or back of the hand to have the bleeding effect coming down from the hand, because after all, that's how we save our hand or hold our hand most of the time, is in downwards position. But because the model is having it raised or upped or about right this way, this is the moment in time that we're looking at the model in. So this is really the effect that we want. So anytime you're doing cut or blood effects, it should really be referenced to the model in the position that it's in. So yes, it might make a little less sense for the blood on the hand to be dripping this way, because obviously he's not holding his hand in this backhand position the entire time. But it's kind of a good place to actually have a visual reference for the person who's looking at that model for. Hopefully we're not picking up the fireworks in my background, guys, and the police sirens, so. It seems it's going to be an exciting night in my town for some reason. The one exciting thing about living between a police station and a fire station. Okay, guys, any questions so far? Thank you. Well, looks like we have a good group so far tonight, which is good. I can definitely appreciate having a well-behaved group versus Rana's, which had to squish two people. Okay, any questions? Okay. So we don't have any questions. I know there's a little bit of a lag, so I want to give people plenty of time. So don't be afraid to join us at the Cyber Wars. The Facebook is there. Let me grab the HMGS link. I will have this up on, there you go, YouTube later tonight. If you want to review anything that we talked about, or if you have any questions for me there, it's a good place to get me. We will also have the Discord up and going, so I will be into Discord later on tonight painting as well. So feel free to come and join me there. If you go to the HMGS link, it will actually take you to the Cyber Wars site, which will take you to the Discord. Before you get into the Discord, you have to accept the rules and follow the policies. Once you click on that, then you have all the rest of the chat open up for you. And thank you very much for coming down and joining me for the Skin Tone tonight. Tomorrow night, between the hours of 7 and 9, like we had scheduled tonight, we will have weathering. For the weathering class, where did my barrier go? Oh. So we will be doing a concrete divider as part of our weathering. And we'll be doing pencils, and we'll also be doing some weathering pigments and some paint effects. I also will be teaching how to do a peeling paint effect, which is one of my favorite effects now to kind of do, to show paint peeling away from an object. Kind of like here, focus for me. And actually give that kind of like floorboard or old building kind of effect to it. which is kind of neat because you'll have to take the class to find out. Let me not explain it now. Break the magic of it. We might also try some salt weathering. Since I am at home, I had some time to prep some stuff first for the class. So, we can kind of use the magic of cooking show effect for it. Okay, guys, if there is no questions and everyone feels comfortable with everything, I will call it a night tonight, and I will catch you next time.